There are 12 different lifestyle habits, and these are split across nutrition, exercise, sleep, and emotional well-being. Each week, there are focuses for nutrition, for exercise, for sleep, and emotional well-being. And we start off in week 1 relatively gently. And then over the course of the 12 weeks, we're building on what we're putting into practice, and we're making it more and more challenging, such that at week 12, we arrive at a point where the evidence suggests you will have significantly shifted your longevity score, those 10 truths.
Mm-hmm.
So then you can do your retest and you can see proof that this program has worked and has shifted your health in a favorable direction.
Do you need perfect adherence to achieve this?
You do not need perfect adherence. In fact, I would encourage people to not be so hard on themselves. I don't expect a 100% adherence. We've factored that in to what we're recommending. Now, we're going to provide coaching and emails and reminders along the way to kind of help encourage and improve adherence. But even if you were to adhere to this 70 or 80%, you're going to get improvements in your health. So, for example, some of the lifestyle habits that we've included from a nutrition perspective, we want people to optimize their protein intake. We think that's important for a variety of reasons. Now, the total amount of protein that you consume has a direct effect on your strength. It affects bone mineral density, but also where that protein's coming from affects your cardiometabolic health risk factors. So we're providing people with a target for total protein intake, but then we're also recommending that they're getting at least a certain amount of that from plant protein. And we have a whole guide on protein so that people can see what are the really good sources of plant protein on a per calorie basis. And so if they're not familiar with that, they can make some decisions more easily. We have a lifestyle habit built around fats. So we're encouraging people to cook with olive or avocado oil instead of butter or tallow or coconut or palm oil.
Does it include recipes or just general guidelines?
So we have both. The guidelines are general. In the weekly learnings, people will get some recipes. So for example, in week 1, the theme of that week is built around protein. So each week there is a different theme that we're educating on. And in that week, we have a short video that we want people to watch. I've interviewed Stuart Phillips, Don Layman, Chris Gardner, Volta Longo, all these guys with slightly different research backgrounds, different individual or personal diets themselves, who all have really important things to say about protein. So we've pulled some of that information together for people to listen to.
Just finding the specific pieces that relate to the theme or the subject matter that you're trying to address and organizing that in a way that is helpful to the person.
And then that week they do get recipes. So they get a high protein plant-based recipe PDF, which has sort of 15 or 20 different recipe ideas in there.
How much of a time commitment is this whole thing?
A lot of this is set and forget. The exercise component is the most time consuming.
How much time?
And
a day, per week?
Well, we're wanting people to, by week 12, be doing 150 minutes of zone 2/3 training per week. So we would call zone 2/3 moderate intensity. Mm-hmm. Somewhere in the ballpark of, say, 60 to 80% max heart rate. So that's 150 minutes a week, 2.5 hours. We want people to be working up to a 4x4 minute HIIT interval per week. with a warm-up and a cool-down, that's another 30 minutes. So you're at 3 hours of training from a cardiovascular exercise point of view across a week. And then on top of that, resistance training by week 12, we want people doing at least twice per week. And those sessions are to be 45 to 60 minutes. So let's just say that you're doing 60-minute sessions. Mm-hmm. It's 5 hours of exercise a week. That's the most time-consuming part of this program, which is less than an hour a day if you drag that over a 7-day week.
Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about the sleep piece.
So sleep, we focused on 2 aspects. There are so many things that we could include into this challenge.
Yeah, well, it just gets infinitely more and more complicated.
Right.
I've had conversations with domain experts in a lot of these areas. You've had more than I have. And if anybody who's listening to this or watching it wants to drill down deep on VO2 max or sleep or protein or whatever, just like go to the proof and get into Simon's archive, because I'm sure that you're going to find what you want and people are going to talk for hours about this stuff. We're trying to like canvas it and get to just the meat on the bones here.
Yeah, exactly. So you can go and find a whole 2-hour episode on fermented foods if you want. But
only 2 hours?
Yeah, that was one of the shorter ones. We're getting people to focus on sleep duration. So how long are you in bed for? So the research is pretty clear that 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night is associated with lower total mortality, premature death. Now, if you're in bed for 8 hours, you probably get 7 hours sleep. I'm not sure if you've ever looked on your Whoop.
Oh yeah, it's like, because I used to just think, I went to bed at this time and I woke up at this time. The Whoop, you realize like, time in bed is not necessarily an indicator of how much time you slept, nor is it an indicator certainly of the restorative phases of sleep that are most important.
So we're recommending that people are in bed for 8 hours per night. Now, I think you've had Sachin Panda on.
No, I haven't actually.
You haven't had him on?
Yeah.
Okay. But you've had episodes on where you've discussed circadian rhythms and circadian biology, and everyone's experienced chronic jet lag. Fly across the other side of the world to Byron Bay, where I live, and you're going to feel pretty lousy until you adjust to that new time zone. What people may be a little less aware of is that that's a very sort of acute form of chronic of circadian disruption, but you can have more of a chronic, insidious circadian disruption, which is occurring whilst you're staying in the same time zone because of the way that you're living. And so, circadian biology, in short, we have these natural fluctuations of hormones and things like our heart rate and our blood pressure. They change throughout the day, and they really just change in order to prepare us for what we're about to do. So in the morning, things are changing to get us ready for being active and get us ready for digesting food. Later in the evening, various physiological processes are changing based on these circadian rhythms to get us ready for rest and rejuvenation and renewal overnight. These circadian rhythms are primarily affected by 2 external cues in our environment. There's 2 things that can really throw them out of whack. One is light exposure. So if we're sitting up late at night in very, very, very bright lights, let's say it's 9 p.m., our body, and it's dark outside, our body, we might be sitting in LA, but our body thinks we're in Sydney. Mm-hmm. So we can cause some dysregulation of our circadian rhythms, and then that affects the release of melatonin, which has an effect on your sleep, for example. We can also dramatically affect these circadian rhythms through the timing in which we eat. That's the other really important signal here. So within this challenge, we have 2 different habits that speak to nurturing our circadian rhythms. One is light exposure. We want people in the morning to get outside, get at least 10 minutes of natural light exposure in the first couple of hours of waking up. That's important. That sets your clock.
Mm-hmm. This is the Huberman protocol around morning sunlight.
And then at nighttime, as the sun's going down, ideally you don't have to turn all the lights off in the house, but it will be helpful if you dim the lights down. And if you're using screens, you can adjust the brightness on those and put them into night mode. And then with regards to the timing of our food, there's some really interesting research that has come out of Courtney Peterson's lab. I interviewed her, looking at how efficiently is our body utilizing nutrients at different times of the day. And it seems that, particularly at nighttime, a couple of hours before we go to bed, we have changes in hormones that make things like glucose metabolism much less effective. It makes sense. Our body is getting ready to go to sleep, not to digest food and convert it into energy. The ideal kind of eating window, and some people have described this as a circadian biology eating window or circadian fasting. I don't think it's really a crazy fast, is you're in bed for 8 hours a night. That's what we said just before. And when you wake up, not eating for 1 or 2 hours upon waking. And before you go to bed, not eating for 1 or 2 hours.
Before you go to bed.
Now, let's say you do that as 2 hours. So you're in bed for 8. You don't eat for the first 2 hours of waking up. And then before you go to bed, you're not eating in the 2 hours leading up to bed. Automatically, that means your eating window is at 12 hours.
Mm-hmm.
The average person's eating window in America is 15 to 16 hours.
Mm.
So pretty much rolling out of bed, having a bite of a donut, and eating all the way up to going to sleep again. The reason why all of this is important is that we know that this chronic circadian disruption significantly increases risk of metabolic diseases, significantly increases risk of obesity, of cardiovascular disease. So there are repercussions if we're living in a way where our circadian rhythms are disrupted. And it's not just the long term. If you're experiencing chronic circadian disruption, you're likely to feel more brain fog, more fatigue, lower energy or lethargy on a daily basis. So just getting some routine in place where we're in bed for 8 hours, we're thinking about light exposure, and then we're eating at a regular time, trying to avoid eating too close to waking up or going to bed, can make a very big difference.
This is like my Mount Everest because I get so hungry at night, man. It's very difficult for me to not eat in the 2 hours before I go to sleep. Like that is my Achilles heel. So if I accomplish nothing other than figuring out how to master that as a result of doing this challenge, that would be a huge win for me.
Have you played around with the types of food that you're eating?
Yeah. And when I was wearing a continuous glucose monitor, it was very evident, like when I would eat like right before going to bed, how it would wreak havoc on me. I would wake up in the middle of the night and stuff like that, and my blood glucose regulation is super dysregulated as a result of that. Like I know I shouldn't do it, and this is a habit that's been very difficult for me to break.
I haven't seen this formally studied, so I can't speak to an intervention, but I have a hypothesis here, and I'm not sure whether you've tried this, but I'd be interested to see what happens if you have a slightly lower carbohydrate dinner and higher fat.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And I suspect, because that will be slower to digest and metabolize, that you might feel fuller for longer.
It's a weird satiety thing, and I don't know if it's just mental or emotional, but if I don't feel full when I get into bed, like I feel like agitated. I feel like I need to, there's something emotional or physiological about, how you kind of relax when you've just eaten, like your anxiety and your stress level lowers. And for some reason, if I'm going to bed and I'm hungry, like it becomes very difficult for me to fall asleep.
I get that. You might need a bigger plate at dinner.
I eat plenty, trust me, dude. Anyway, I don't want to get too sidetracked on that, but I think that's really important, and that's great. And if you want to be more rigorous about your sleep tracking, there's always, like a Whoop or something like that you can get that, listen, I never take this thing off, and it's really been helpful in keeping me on track. Not so much for the day-to-day, but more for the trends and just understanding the types of behaviors and habits that influence things like HRV and the amount of REM or deep sleep that I'm getting every night, and how that impacts resting heart rate, stress, like all those sorts of things. Like it's just information that arms you with the data points to kind of solve the arithmetic of what works for you and what's leading you astray.
Yeah, I love the sleep data, and I agree. I've been able to identify a few different kind of patterns. I've noticed if I'm working really late, then my restorative deep sleep is much lower. Mm-hmm. Probably going to bed thinking about all the things I need to do.
And then if you correlated that with where your stress levels are and how long it takes them to go down as you go to sleep, because if you haven't reduced those before going to bed, you're going to have a less restful evening of sleep.
Yeah, my recovery today was 86%.
That's pretty good.
I was happy with that.
Yeah, right on.